So the importance of card removal has always been one of the most talked about things in Yu-Gi-Oh! It's been the very way that you get rid of your opponent's cards, and it's how you manage to take advantage away from your opponent. Spot removal could range from bounce effects, destruction effects, or even banish effects. And for the purposes of this video, I'm going to be focused around banish effects, since I think it's probably one of the most important ones. But if you're familiar with the spot removal discussion, people will tell you that removal is the most important thing since it gets you ahead of the match. But I don't see enough people talking about the importance of being able to put your opponent's monsters away in general. So, what do I mean? Let's start with an example. Let's say that you and your opponent are both using meta decks, and you've been able to resolve a bunch of destruction effects. And despite destroying a bunch of your opponent's cards, your opponent always manages to bring back their destroyed cards or revive their destroyed monsters. And let's say you manage to remove their cards again, and let's say you even manage to board wipe them. But despite pulling off all of these removal effects, your opponent manages to bring everything back or most of everything back. And this is what I mean by not being able to put your opponent's cards or monsters away. You just can't quite make your opponent's cards or monsters stay gone for the rest of the match. And while this more than likely annoys most players, this points out an issue that I think goes unnoticed and underappreciated. The issue is that it's important for cards to stay gone after being removed by an effect. If too many decks can simply and easily bring back their cards, then you're pretty much fighting a losing battle. You'll just inevitably be outpaced and outplayed, which is why it's important for you to have a card or cards that are able to remove your opponent's monsters or cards for good. Otherwise, you'll be facing the issue that I'm describing. And if you look at the past, destruction effects used to be the kind of removal method of choice. And this was obviously back in the day when the game was much slower, which meant that your opponent wasn't able to pull off crazy combos, and they certainly weren't able to bring back destroyed cards or monsters like how you often would do so today. So this ultimately meant that destruction effects weren't as useful as they once were. And because of it, players looked to alternatives such as bounce effects, which helped for a bit, but it meant that the opponent could still viably bring out that card since it was usually bounced back to the hand. And this became a bigger issue once decks became better at summoning from the hand, deck, or graveyard. So once again, players looked to another alternative, and this time it was banish effects. So if you don't remember, banish effects used to be very devastating back in the day, especially since there weren't very many cards that could bring back banished cards. Back then, banished cards were referred to as being removed from play instead of being said to be banished, and it seemed to be the perfect workaround for putting away your opponent's cards. But things like Return from the Different Dimension, Cyframe Lord Omega, and Pot of Acquisitiveness help return some of these banished cards that were thought to have been permanently gone for the rest of the duel. But you may be wondering, if banished cards can be brought back fairly easily, how do I get rid of my opponent's cards? And the way you do that is by using card effects that banished cards face down. Banishing cards face down is a fairly recent spin to the banish mechanic, and it's added an interesting twist on the banish mechanic in general, since it divides banished cards into cards that are banished face down and cards that are banished face up. And the main benefit is if you banish one of your opponent's cards face down, it's much harder for your opponent to bring back their banished card, since most cards that bring back banished cards only bring back face up banished cards. And this is the case since most cards are banished face up by default. The main way to bring back a card that is banished face down is by using a card like Cyframe Lord Omega to bring back any old banished card. But for the most part, a card that is banished face down is pretty much gone for the rest of the duel, which is why cards like Evenly Matched saw such competitive play in the meta scene since it helped put away a lot of problematic cards. And while a lot of players may hate these cards, I'm sincerely thankful that these cards exist. It may sound kind of odd, but I'm truly glad that these cards are a part of the game. In fact, I think they're important specifically because they effectively put away these very problematic cards. And it means that meta decks are going to have a much harder time recycling their cards that got banished face down. And this brings a sort of balance to the meta scene, since banishing cards face down helps reduce the spam problem that ultimately contributes to the power creep. And I sincerely hope that Konami doesn't make a bunch of cards that bring back banished face down cards, since we pretty much need cards that permanently put away these problematic cards. And it puts a snare in the road for these broken strategies, since they potentially have to face their cards getting sealed away, and especially their key cards getting sealed away for the rest of the duel. And I think this is an overall positive in general. But yeah, these have been my thoughts on this topic, and it's an important topic that I think doesn't get talked about too often, especially because a lot of players tend to complain about the Yu-Gi-Oh power creep and how a lot of people hate the spam game present in Yu-Gi-Oh. So it makes sense to say that banishing cards face down are important, and they're a very important mechanic to have in the game since it keeps things healthy and balanced by getting rid of a potentially broken card, or just potentially broken cards in general. But with that pretty much wraps it up for this video. If you would like to support more content like this, you can do so via donation on my Cash App. I need to resolve some issues with my Patreon, but I still post on there, and you can still catch my content on that same page. But for the meantime, you can help me out on Cash App by finding me at the Necromancer1040 Cash App tag. And with that, thank you so much for watching, thank you so much for your support, and I'll catch you in the next video. Alright, take care.